Okay. We appear to be live and in charge or something like that. Anyway, hello. Good evening. Nice to see you. I'm Tad. It is, I almost said 7 p.m. It's not almost 7 p.m. Well, it's 7 p.m. somewhere. I'm not quite sure where that would be. Somewhere out in the Pacific Islands, maybe. Anyway, what time it is actually here is 1 o'clock. 1 o'clock in California. Kick that down another notch. 1 o'clock in California. I will be here till about 2. I will be reading. We are getting into the closing thrash of Happy Hour in Hell. And so that is what we will be reading. And before that, what is there to relate? Just the usual drama. Lots of work to do, as always. Both Deb and I, with many, many things to do, and as usual, struggling to keep up with our own lives. I am working on Splintered Sun. I am still more or less on track for having the first draft finished by the end of this month, which will give me a couple of weeks to get it together before I send it out to readers. Specifically my publisher. And let me think, what else is there? The dogs are still very entertaining in the kind of Chinese proverb sense. It's actually fascinating. I mean, I'm not going to spend all night on this because I know not everybody is. Excuse me. I know not everybody is as interested in these things as I am, but dog psychology and dog interactions are kind of been consuming me for most of 2025 so far, as you all know, or if you've been regularly checking in, which is one reason I talk about them so much. But I'm also just kind of fascinated by the whole thing. And I think I told you folks already that I made a tragic strategic error, assuming that Johnny would want a companion when our last other dog, Walter, we at one point had 4 dogs, but then through attrition, old age mostly, and other things, we were down to 1 dog, Johnny, and he was the youngest, or the most recent dog to come into the family for almost his entire life with us since back 2012, whenever we got him, and so as I said, I made an assumption that he was so used to being with other dogs that, not so much just in daily life, but like when we go out of town, and sometimes we go out of town for several weeks at a stretch, like for a book tour, like I'm doing in October, and so I just really thought, yeah, he will need another dog. Well, maybe he would have if we'd picked a different dog, but we picked a very active, very bouncy, over the top, youngish, she was not even a year old when we got her, dog, Lemon, which again, you all know these stories, so I'm not going to go back and explain it all. But anyway, but recently now, after we've got it so they would both be able to go in and out of the house at will, because for a long time, Johnny just moved out to the backyard. He was just like, screw this for a game of soldiers. I'm moving out. And, he just stayed outside for months. I mean, I could sometimes coax him in and things like that. And they would at least take treats in the same room. But other than that, they were quite separated. And then just in the last week or two, after they got to the point where they could kind of both coexist, Johnny is now coming back into the house, but he's also kind of reclaiming the house. So there are territorial issues. And so there's that, where Johnny is now more like, hey, I live here. I was here first. But also at the same time, he just cannot deal with Lemon's craziness. Because, of course, she gets the zoomies where she has all kinds of need to just run and jump and run and run and run and spin and do all these kinds of things. I call them her lemon zests, and I refer to it as her being lemon zesty or just zesty. But Johnny is now being much more assertive, and as a result, we've had some like some contretemps, to use a French term, some struggles and even a couple of fights between them as they're trying to work this stuff out. Johnny actually got a gash in his ear today because he didn't want Lemon pinning him back in a corner. So my feeling is that there's some of this is going to have to be worked out between them. That they're going to have to understand each other and set their guidelines with each other. But that may be wishful thinking on my part. It may be only a matter of days till they tear each other to shreds, or they gang up on us and turn on us in our sleep. That's always a possibility too. I don't trust animals. Of course, I don't trust people either. So. But anyway, so that's what's been going on this week, is this kind of interesting shoe is on the other foot. Now Johnny wants to come back inside. He doesn't want her to mess with him, though. He's not going to be chased out again. He's going to stand up for himself. But there's also this sort of tentative, evolving piece between them when Lemon is not just driving him nuts. So that's been interesting and occasionally very stressful. As we mentioned, they had a struggle today, and both of them got nipped a little bit. Johnny got actually kind of an unpleasant little gash on his ear, but he didn't leave the house again. He just went off to the other side of the room, and he stayed in. So he's still kind of moving back in, which is very interesting. Anyway, I know that stuff is more interesting to me than it is to you, but animals are not much less complicated than we are. And the dog brain may not have all of the different facilities that ours has, or rather, I should say, it may not have the same facilities that we have. Obviously, they have things like an olfactory sense and a sense of hearing that are superior to ours. The sense of smell, I can't remember I'm just plucking a figure out of the air, but it's something like 100,000 times more sensitive than ours, their sense of smell. So obviously, you need a lot of brain power to do that, and dogs are not stupid. Very few mammals are actually stupid, even by the standards of the most religiously opposed to the idea of animal intelligence folks that you could find. They just aren't. They're smart. Dogs in particular have been living with humans for at least 40,000 years. They evolved in practically real time, really over a space of maybe 100,000 years or less. They evolved from wolves into animals that were much less adrenalized, much less fight or flight, much more. And obviously this is probably in part because the ones that first approached human camps were the ones that were least afraid of humans, or the ones who were most willing to try it and see what happened. So for whatever reason, we began to select. We humans began to select those wolves which were most useful to us and least dangerous to us. But as far as I know, this is a true scientific story and not apocryphal. We've also found that and pardon me if I've told this before, but I think it's fascinating. In Russia, where they raise, among other things, they raised foxes for fur. So basically a fur farm with captive foxes. And the foxes would fight, the foxes would gnaw on their own bodies or whatever. It's not nice raising animals for fur. But this was back in the 30s or so, I think, during the Soviet science era. But they brought in a guy who started trying to reduce the amount of adrenaline in the captive foxes. And as he and his assistants did so over several generations, what they found was that the foxes who were selected for less adrenaline and less aggression, and then, of course, obviously the least aggressive, least adrenalized would be then mated to others who were in a similar category. But that over just a few generations, the foxes' noses got more blunt. They began to develop other dog-like characteristics because, of course, they are canids. And in fact, just became more and more like dogs just from reducing the aggression. So, what that suggests, at least to me, but probably to lots of people, is that that may be what happened with the original wolves who became the dogs we know today in all their marvelous, horrifying variety, which is that the ones who were the least adrenalized, the ones who were the least likely to freak out, and the least frightened of humans were selecting themselves in a sense. And then as we began to live with them, obviously the ones that would attack would not be the ones whose puppies would be favored, attack humans, I mean, and et cetera, et cetera. So I'm more interested in dogs than I should be, and not just because I love them, but because there's a lot of really interesting things to find out about dogs. Anyway, okay, enough babbling. I'm going to say hello to people, and then I'm going to start reading. So let me check in and see who has checked in. And I see Petra is checking in, presumably from Berlin. Rosalba is checking in. Chris Fobb, hello, sir. Jeremy, my friend Jeremy, who is right around this area, so he's up late. Kristen, who is also from this area and is up late. Wouter van den Berg. Hello, Wouter. Good to see you as always. Isaac is checking in. Nikki Chetwind. Ilva Darlin. Hello, hello. Long time no talk. Sorry, we've been crazy busy, but I hope you're well and your family's good. Christina, Petra's daughter, is here. Dirk is checking in also, if I remember correctly, from Berlin, but I could have that wrong. Iris, hello. Ricky Gervais. Well, that's a very familiar name, but I don't think it's probably the same Ricky Gervais. But anyway, welcome aboard, Ricky. Nice to have you with us. Christy Sanders, who I think might have been the first person who checked in tonight. Nicole, good to see you. Mark Redmond, checking in from Yorkshire. And Mark Craigbaum, checking in from, where are you today, these days, Mark? Michigan, I seem to remember. Anyway, and who else has checked in? Maria Henschke. Hello, Maria. Thank you for joining us. So let me get out the thing and start reading here. I will attempt to give you a brief précis. The brief précis of what's happening is Bobby Dollar is escaping from hell after making a deal with Eligor, that if he gets out of hell and brings Eligor the feather, Eligor will give him Kaz and leave them both alone. And he produced Kaz and said, I will let her go, and I will not persecute either of you. So the one thing that he can't do is break his own word. So Bobby, although realizing it's always a bad idea to make a deal with a devil in this case, Bobby has taken off, and he's been in the course of trying to escape with help from Rip Rash and others. And he has most recently gone through the Forest of the Suicides, although before doing that, he literally did self-surgery and removed the Intracubus, the little hell guardian angel, from his head that Eligor put in there. Just cut his own head open and took it off. Now, admittedly, it's his demon body. But, so then he continued to flee, being chased by Commissar Nylok and Nylok's troops. And he finally got down to Abaddon, and he has now been approaching the Neronian Bridge, which is how he came into hell in the first place. So that's where we're at. Okay, so starting. Happy Hour in Hell, Chapter 43, Mr. Johnson and Me. Appropriately, Robert Johnson's infamous blues song kept running through the back of my mind as I raced the last yards toward the bridge. Got to keep on moving, got to keep moving, blues falling down like hail, blues falling down like hail. And the days keep on worrying me, there's a hellhound on my trail, a hellhound on my trail. One of his very best songs. I don't know anyone who loves the blues who isn't fascinated by Johnson, his strange short life and his haunted voice. And at the moment, it was literal truth for me. Hellhounds baying just behind me, hell soldiers and rat-bat crazy Commissar Nylock behind them. And that made it an odd time to have any song going through one's mind instead of one of the standard variations on, "Oh my God, I'm going to die, run, 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 fucking run." Still, even an angel can have feelings of inferiority, and as I sprinted for my life and soul across the ashy, stony ground of the last inner cavern toward the gate and the Neronian bridge, a part of me was actually pleased that I could finally consider Johnson without feeling like such a white guy poseur. At last, I could say, without reservation, "Yeah, I know just what you're talking about, Robert. I've had those blues. I know just what you mean." Stupid, I know, especially at a time like that. But if I hadn't been stupid, I wouldn't have been in that situation in the first place, would I? I plunged through the gate tower. I plunged through the gate tower, forgetting how close it was to the end of the bridge. A couple of steps later, when I crashed into the first ashy Pompeii victim purgatory creatures trying to force their way into hell, I almost slid right off the bridge into that unimaginable abyss. Getting past them was like forcing my way through rotting styrofoam. The silent shapes created just enough resistance to make things difficult and blocked my vision as well. Not to mention that any damage I did to them left their soapy scum on the bridge itself. Now, try to imagine fighting your way through literally dozens and dozens of those things on a bridge less than 6 feet wide, with nothing beneath you for miles except screams floating up from the deeps. I still had Rip Rash's giant knife in my belt, so I yanked it out and began to hack my way through the things. I know, I'm an angel, and I'm supposed to be sympathetic by nature, but after having just spent a really long time in hell, the thought that the only thing these horrible mindless shapes wanted was to get into the place made me far less patient with them than the first time through. I shredded them like a cluster bomb in the middle of Smurf Village, sending bits flying everywhere like dirty suds. The hellhounds were roaring behind me as they encountered the first of the purgatory refugees, and I fancied I heard a note of doggy surprise at how difficult it was to get through them. As the throngs of faceless shapes thinned, I was able to pick up speed, but that meant the hellhounds were able to do the same. I heard their talons clank against the stone behind me, louder and louder, so I pushed my blade back into my belt as carefully as I could while running flat out, then pulled out one of my revolvers. I still had plenty of loose bullets, but I couldn't think of any foreseeable sequence of events where I'd get a chance to reload, so I slowed just enough that I could make sure every chamber of both guns was full, then dumped the remaining shells back into my pocket. Maybe my luck was turning because that awkward moment caused me to stumble just a little, which saved me. A harpoon flew past my shoulder, trailing rope that burned the side of my neck before it curved away into the abyss. I had wondered briefly why Nylock and his men hadn't been shooting arrows or guns once they were in range, but I realized now that they didn't want to lose my body off the bridge. They clearly had much more elaborate plans for me than just to shatter me on the rocks impossibly far below or have me melt away to nothing in a fumarole of molten shit. Thus, the harpoons. Bullied off... Thus, the harpoons. Bullied office temps and grumpy commuters, trust me, you haven't really had a bad day until someone's tried to harpoon you. I was already slowing down, exhausted but with hours yet to go, so I decided I should try to improve the odds a little. When I encountered another of the crawling purgatory things grubbing its way across the span, I vaulted over the obstruction, then stopped and crouched behind the humanoid shape and aimed both revolvers back at my pursuers. The grubby, wispy little thing wasn't going to shield me from anything, but I hoped it would at least obstruct my pursuer's view and create a second or two of confusion. My old boss, Leo, used to emphasize taking one good shot over 3 or 4 bad ones. In most, but not all situations. But the honest truth was I didn't have time to take more than one shot. The lead hellhound was only a dozen yards behind me, its 2 fellows right on its tail, and the closest of Nyloc's harpooners only another 10 yards behind them. I braced myself, police style, breathed out, and shot the lead dog right in the face as its scaly black muzzle retracted, exposing the disgusting pink underneath. I hit it square on, and the dog's head unfolded in a red mist. Somehow, even with its snout exploded like an Imogen Cunningham flower made of blood and bone, the hellhound still managed to let out a shrieking yelp of pain and take a half-dozen more steps before it stumbled and collapsed. To my further astonishment, it didn't die on the spot, but got up, staggering, and looked like it might try to pursue me even with most of its head missing. But one of the other dogs ran helplessly into it from behind. Both the bloody mess hound and the second dog got tangled and tumbled off the bridge together. I squeezed off another couple of shots, hoping to get the last hellhound while it was skidding and struggling in its doggy pal's blood, but I missed. Nyloc's men hesitated for a moment at the sound of the shot, but then hurried toward me once more, so I scrambled up and sprinted onward. I caught a break I hadn't expected when the commissar's men tried to get the last hellhound moving again. Looking back, I saw that the ugly beast was refusing to budge, not because it was afraid of me. Stop, don't make me laugh, but because it was so busy licking up the blood and brain fragments spilled by the one I'd shot. When one of the handlers tried to urge it forward with a whip, the hound turned on him, snapping at his face with that toothy snout and pulling off what looked like a good chunk of his nose and cheek. I managed to reload both guns as I hurried on, knowing that the respite was going to be a short one. I could hear Nyloc screeching to shoot the dog if it wouldn't get moving again. Unfortunately, I fumbled the rest of the bullets, then missed my grab as they bounced into the abyss. The commissar might have only one hound left, but he had about 100 armed followers against my total of 12 bullets. Running as hard as I could, drawing on reserves of demonic strength that were probably well outside the body's normal factory specs, I managed to put a little distance between myself and the stalled hunters. Hearing Nyloc's angry shrieks getting fainter was the sweetest music I'd heard in a long time. I don't know how long I ran before I heard the sound of talons ringing against the stone again. It seemed like a long time, but I'd slid into a kind of unthinking state where not even old blues songs were running through my brain, only the slap of my own feet like a slowing metronome. I heard the hound crashing along behind me, very close now. Then the noise suddenly stopped. I knew better than to assume something had distracted it, so instead of turning to look, I threw myself flat against the stone of the Neronian bridge. A long shadow passed over me, like a shark above a startled diver. It seemed to take a long time. Making the beast miss its killing pounce hadn't really done me a lot of good, however. The hellhound landed and kept its balance. In fact, not only didn't it slide off the bridge, it managed to spin around a few yards ahead of me, like a Mini Cooper making a handbrake turn, cutting off my escape. Any moment now, Nyloc and his men would be coming up behind, and that would be that. So I did the only thing I could do. I ran at the hellhound. Okay, now, if I were writing a book of advice for young angels, I would probably start it out with, never, ever, ever go to hell. Then I would add a footnote that said, however, if for some reason you do happen to wind up in hell, never, ever run directly at a hellhound. But I didn't have any choice, really, since it was now between me and any possibility of escape. I lifted my guns and fired as I went, but the beast was bounding toward me, moving so quickly that my two fast shots went right over it without even creasing its weird leathery hide. It landed on top of me, and that's the last clear thing I remember for a little while, except a lot of snarling and screaming. I think I was doing most of the second part. The drooling lamprey mouth darted at my face. The creature's eyeless head followed my every move as though I had filed a plan of action with Hellhound Central ahead of time. I had to use both hands to fend off the crazed hellhound, and while I was fighting, I lost one of my guns over the side. Just when I thought I could get my remaining gun free to shoot the four-legged bastard, it struck like a cobra, sinking its teeth into the meat of my hand so that the gun flipped loose, clattering on the bridge. I reached for the blade, which, thank the highest and all his very nicest archangels, was still in my belt. When I got the chance, I shoved it through the hellhound's lower jaw and up into where its brain should have been. I don't know whether the beast didn't have a brain in there or just didn't use it much, but it clearly wasn't going to die just because I drove a knife the size of a machete through its head. It did, however, seem to get grumpier and began trying even harder to suck my face into its unpleasantly round, toothy mouth. I used the knife embedded in its jaw to keep it at bay, hanging on to the hilt for dear life as the hound kept forcing itself at my softer, more important bits. I won't spoil your day by describing what genuine hellhounds smell like up close, by the way. You can thank me later. It was a stalemate, one that I knew I was going to lose pretty quickly. The thing weighed twice as much as I did, and if a knife in the brain wasn't slowing it down, chances were I wasn't going to out-wrestle it either. So I grabbed my last chance. I pulled my feet up under me, put them against the thing's bone-armored chest, and then shoved as hard as I could. If I thought I'd get lucky twice and it would fall away and slip off the bridge, I was disappointed. To be honest, I hadn't thought things through that carefully. I just knew the beast was about to eat my head and that my head was something I shouldn't let it eat. The hound did fall back, and its back legs skidded out from under it, but that only meant it scrambled in place for a moment until it could find its balance and lunged toward me again. But while that happened, I'd found my gun. I lay on my back as the monster came toward me, with little chance to aim as carefully as I had at the first dog, so I emptied a couple of rounds into it as quickly as I could pull the trigger. I hit it in the chest, making a big, dripping red hole, and also blew off one of its ears, along with a chunk of sloping skull. But although the thing whined and choked a little, it straightened its legs and took another few staggering steps toward me. Cursing like a man who's just seen his hated brother-in-law win the lottery, I shot again. This time I put a round square in its chest, and the dog took a strange, awkward, sideways step. Then another, as if the bridge beneath it had suddenly slanted to one side. Then it walked right off the span. I heard angry shouts from the hunters who'd just reached the scene, but I didn't bother looking. I was busy trying to struggle upright. If I'd counted correctly in all the confusion, I had one gun and one bullet left, so I wasn't going to outduel Nylock and his boys, but perhaps, since they no longer had the dogs, I could outrun them. I was sure going to try. Something hit me as I took my first steps. Hit me hard, like I'd walked in front of a speeding pickup truck. I flew 6 feet forward through the air, flopped on my belly, and slid, ending up with my arm and shoulder hanging off the bridge's edge. It all happened so suddenly that it took a moment to realize I had about a foot of harpoon sticking out of my chest. The fact that the harpoon was attached to one of my pursuers became clear a moment later when something pulled on it from behind and the harpoon slid back until its barbed head caught on my collarbone. You will not think me too big of a sissy, I hope, when I tell you that despite my lack of tear ducts, I did my best to weep like a disappointed kindergartner. Well, in between bouts of coughing up blood. The cable attached to the harpoon yanked tight again, dragging me back from the edge. Through the horrible agony, I reached up to grab the rope as I struggled to roll onto my back where I had a chance to defend myself. I had no strategy. All I could think of was that I didn't want anyone to yank on that barbed harpoon ever again until the universe ended. Nylok was coming toward me past the creature who'd speared me, a squat troll-like thug wearing a proud if unevenly toothed grin. The commissar followed the tight, vibrating harpoon line like a child coming down to the tree on Christmas morning. His head had mostly regrown.
"And what do we have here?" Nylok murmured. "Oh, goodness me! Oh, look! It is the snake-staffed creature, the one who ruined my beautiful, beautiful grave jaw. I think that before we bring you back to the mastema, we must make you answer for that, mustn't we? I think all we have to do is bring back a good-sized portion of you to be tortured by the inquisitorial board, The head and a few dependent bits, perhaps. And after we have played with it, the rest can go into the mortar for rebuilding Gravejaw. That would be appropriate, would it not, my rude little guest?"
It took me a moment to figure it out because so many parts of me were sending back messages of terrible, overwhelming pain, but I was lying on my gun. I reached under myself as unobtrusively as I could, meanwhile closing my eyes as if I had just given up, trying to get Nylok to move closer. One shot left. It wouldn't save me. There were too many other hunters behind the commissar, but I could at least take Nylok out. When I thought I was in a position to move quickly, despite the pain, I tugged the revolver out from under me, aimed, and pulled the trigger. The noise was surprisingly loud for a place with no ceiling, the echoes snapping back off the cylindrical walls over and over. It hurt a lot to roll and move so violently, so quickly, but it would all have been worth it if I hadn't missed. Nylok didn't seem disturbed that a bullet had just flown past his bony head.
He said, "So unpleasant. First you destroy my sweet hounds, now you would attack me too, for doing my civic duty? Shame on you, Snakestaff, shame."
I think the rattling noise was him laughing, but I was a bit distracted by the glow now hovering in the air just behind him. Several of Nylok's soldiers were also staring. At first it was only a fizzle, no more than the smolder of a road flare, but then that fizzle suddenly dove down toward the ground, leaving an unstable streak of light hanging in the air. Just as Nylok himself realized that something was happening, a glowing hand appeared from the jagged mid-air stripe of light. A second later, Smiler bounded out of nothingness and onto the bridge beside Nylok. Even as the commissar opened up his bony jaw to shout an order, and well before his astonished soldiers could do anything, Smiler grabbed Nylok and jammed his four-bladed knife into the commissar's neck, then began to twist it around in a way that couldn't have been pleasant even for an archdemon. Nylok screeched in pain and surprise. His men came crowding in around him, trying to pull loose the scrawny thing, but they couldn't get a decent grip. Smiler was literally climbing around on Nylok, clinging like the commissar was a bunch of bananas, and he was some kind of bionic murder monkey. I realized I was staring at all this with my mouth open when I should be running like crazy. I tried to get up, but the heavy rope still ran from the harpoon in my chest and all the way back into the melee, and now it was wound around several people. Every tug as they fought with Smiler made the harpoon twist in my bloody chest, an agony I won't insult with the weak word pain.
"Now it sees!"
Smiler screeched from the middle of the tangle. Nyloc's men were fighting desperately to free their master, but they were limited by the narrowness of the bridge and Smiler's astonishing, horrifying quickness.
It sees now. The reason. You are the reason. That is why you came before you should. It sees.
At the edge of the fight, the demon soldier holding my harpoon suddenly grunted, staggered, then tumbled off the bridge in a spray of his own blood. I had only a split instant to brace myself against being yanked over with him, but to my grateful astonishment, the rope lay slack on the bridge, a bloody meat spider still clutching its far end. The harpoonist had gone, but his hand had stayed behind, thanks to Smiler's crazy knife work. Given a second's reprieve, I did my best to break the rope because I couldn't run with that thing trailing behind me. It was going to be bad enough with the harpoon still waggling around in there, probably tearing the shit out of my demon lungs and demon heart. As I struggled to free myself, I backed carefully away from the melee. The space left by the harpoon demon's sudden exit had given Smiler more room to work, and work he did. It was the damnedest thing I've ever seen, and I don't care if you pardon the expression. Imagine a world-class but spastic ballet dancer. Now, run the video in your head about 3 or 4 times faster and try to imagine that ballet dancer carries a long, sharp blade, and when it uses that blade on flesh, it believes it's preying. I have never seen anything so horribly brutal that I could also call beautiful. I know, it sounds weird, but it was art. Like the wildest improvised solo you've ever heard, spun out, sped up, and then landing at the end with a crash right back on the main riff. Everything happened so quickly, it was hard to tell it wasn't planned. But nobody, not even a demon, ever planned to die like that, on the murderous blade of that giggling, rubbery thing. 2 more of Nyloc's soldiers staggered bleeding off the bridge into nothingness. The whole pack of them now were converging on my unexpected savior like a piranha in a feeding frenzy. But I didn't think it was Smiler's blood I saw fountaining in the air, or Smiler's fingers and ears flying out of the scrimmage.
Run! He shouted. Run, Angel!
Then, as if to prove Smiler's kind intent, something else came flying out of the ruckus and rolled to a stop near my feet, blood dribbling from it, to join my own good-sized puddle. It was Nyloc's long, skull-like head, the jaws snapping at nothing, slow as a dying crab. The wet, red eyes rolled up, and it saw me. Somehow, despite no longer being attached to larynx or lungs, it said in a near whisper,
I will.
I didn't think, just stomped on it as hard as I could, feeling the bones smash beneath my feet. Shut up, I said, then kicked the broken, oozing lump off the bridge. Just shut up. I ran then, although it was more like hobbling, blood and brain matter still oozing out of the back of my skull, clutching the harpoon stuck through my chest in both hands to minimize the pain from its every movement, a picture William Blake might have painted after a really bad Saturday night. I ran until the bellows and squeals of Nyloc's soldiers had fallen away behind me, then ran on through a darkness I can't even remember now. I vaguely recall reaching the elevator, but I think I kept running even after that, throwing myself blindly against the sides of the coffin-shaped box until I understood I was safe, or at least as safe as I'll ever be in this life, until I could finally say the words Temuel taught me and lay aside my demon body, until I could leave hell behind me and surrender to blessed, blessed blackness. I've never seen Smiler again since the Neronian Bridge. I don't know whether he survived. I'm not sure how I feel about that, but I am sure that he saved me when nothing else but God himself could have done it. Chapter 44, Body in the Trunk. Something finally pulled the blanket of darkness off me, but I couldn't find the buttons and switches yet to make my muscles work correctly, so I lay there for a little while trying to figure out where I was. I had left my body hale and well under a sheet in the late Edward Lyons Walker's house, so that was where I should be, but Elagor had told me his people had searched the place without finding it. That could mean anything. Not much of it good. I had to be patient, though. This long out of my earthly shell made reintegrating a bit like one of those weird dreams you get when you think you're awake but you aren't, or at least not entirely. You hear noises and sometimes even voices from the real world, but you just don't care. Not that I heard voices, because I didn't. I could feel my body, though, or at least some body. I had the cramped, prickling muscles to prove it, and I seemed to be wrapped in the appropriate sheet I'd left my body in. I decided to hope for the best. I was going to give myself another minute or two to reintegrate properly, then get out from under the bed in the upstairs guest room at the late Edward Walker's house and take a shower for about 9 hours straight. If I was extremely lucky, Walker's granddaughter Posey and her boyfriend Garcia would be out somewhere, and I'd have the place to myself for a while. But that wasn't crucial. What I really wanted to do after my shower was go somewhere that had good food and alcoholic beverages and consume lots of both, then go home and do some actual sleeping. Not that a few drinks and a nap was going to make me forget what I'd just been through. I also needed to check in with heaven as soon as possible. Since I still had an earthly body to come home to, I assumed I hadn't been cast into the outer darkness quite yet. But it wouldn't hurt to check. At the very least, I'd probably missed a shit ton of messages. And, of course, I'd have to debrief with Temuel. But I didn't want to think about that yet. I'll be honest, the thought scared me. Yes, he'd done a lot for me, but I didn't know where he stood with Anaita. And nobody, not even Bobby Dollar, everybody's favorite poster boy for lack of impulse control, just jumps up and accuses a major angel and sitting Ephor like Anaita of being a traitor to the highest. Especially somebody like me who is already on 19 kinds of secret probation. Oh, and I had no admissible evidence whatsoever. In fact, the more I thought about it, the more certain I was that I should just keep my mouth shut about most of it, even with the mule, since I didn't know what game he was playing or where he stood vis-a-vis not just Anaita, but also the third way and all the rest of this crazy shit that I was floundering in. However much he'd helped me, Temuel was clearly up to his halo in secrets and weirdness, and I didn't want to force him to choose between me and whatever else he had going on. All this was swirling through my brain as I began to feel awake and connected enough to pull the sheet off my face and, Lazarus-like, rise from the tomb. Okay, rise from under the bed in the second guest room. The bed with the catalog coverlets and floral print pillows, but you get the idea. I had already noted idly that the sheet wrapping me seemed to be a bit rougher and heavier than I remembered, not to mention quite a bit tighter, because of how it lay on my face, but as I tried to rise, I realized that my problem was more complicated than that. It wasn't a sheet on me at all, and it was a tarp. And it wasn't draped over me. It was wrapped around me from head to foot so that my arms were pinned at my sides. This was not the situation I'd been in when I had last lived in this body. Not to mention that I could feel that something was moving me, bouncing me, even tilting me a bit from time to time as though I were lying in the palm of a very, very large creature and was being tipped at different angles while it decided which end to start eating first. I had definitely been in hell too long. Of course, I kept my cool because I knew the worst thing to do was start freaking out before I knew the facts. I calmly began shouting, "What the Jesusly fucking Christ is going on here? Somebody help me!" loudly and repeatedly. Okay, calmly isn't quite the right word, but I didn't only yell. I started pushing and scratching at the heavy tarp big time, inflating my chest and shoving outward with my arms until I finally made enough space to get my hands up to my face. Hands. Plural. That was the first good news. Whatever else had happened to me, I had the full set of grasping implements in working order again, one attached to each wrist with lovely bouquets of functioning fingers at the end. I could tell this because I was busily palpating my face, trying to tell if I was Bobby again or still in the snake staff body. There were no stony lumps over my eyebrows or on my cheeks, and my skin felt much less sandpapery than it had in hell, so I seemed to have returned to being B. Dollar, slightly itinerant angel. A probe at the back of my head found nothing but scalp and hair. No Dr. Teddy surgery scars either, so I was definitely out of the demon body. That calmed me down a little. As I managed to work the canvas tarp a bit farther from my face and began to hear sounds more clearly, I finally realized that I wasn't just rolled in a tarp. I was rolled in a tarp and riding in the trunk of a car. Okay, I'd survived repeated tortures by various finalists from Hell's Got Talent and pursuit by honest-to-blind lemon hellhounds, so mere earthly troubles should have been no sweat. Still, I've watched Goodfellas and the Godfather movies often enough to know that rolled up in a tarp in somebody's trunk is usually not a situation you want to be in. I did everything possible to work the tarp loose so I could use my arms properly, but the thing was thick and old and smelly, I might as well mention while I'm feeling sorry for myself, and I could barely pull it down past my forehead. Still, I could see that I was definitely in the trunk of a car, and I could get my hands out far enough to actually try to work the lock open on the inside of the trunk lid, but the vehicle was apparently too old to have one of those emergency release latches. If I'd had more leverage, I might have been able to rip the entire lock out. I'm pretty strong in my earthbound body, but that wasn't happening either, so I was left with only one heroic alternative. As soon as I began pounding on the inside of the trunk lid, the car started swerving around. Still, whoever was kidnapping me didn't pull over or anything, so I had to start thinking about what I could try next. I wasn't carrying my gun as far as I knew. I certainly hadn't been when I left the body behind, because who wants to spend days or weeks lying on top of a large foreign-made pistol, even if you're unconscious? At the very least, I'd have been coming back to a body with a bunch of painful bruises, if not a few accidental gunshot wounds. So, what was I going to do when they came to take me out and finish me off? And who had grabbed me anyway? Eligor said his people hadn't even found my body, let alone the feather. Was Anaita making sure somebody finished the job she'd originally given to Smiler? I wouldn't have to wait much longer to find out. The car was slowing down, the jouncing growing less. I redoubled my efforts to get free of the tarp and even the odds a bit because wrapped in canvas I was about as dangerous as a large burrito. I had finally worked my upper body free when the car stopped. Someone fumbled with the trunk lid. Disgusted with myself for not having hidden some kind of weapon on my body before leaving it helpless, I braced myself against the floor of the car. When the trunk popped open, I shut my eyes to keep myself from being blinded by the glare and struck out as hard as I could with my fist. I had the deep satisfaction of hearing somebody gasp in serious discomfort and fall down. So I opened my eyes, kicked my way loose from the canvas, and started climbing out of the trunk, but slowed down a bit when I saw that instead of Luca Brasi or one of Don Corleone's other button men, I had instead just punched Clarence the Junior Angel right in the nuts. "What the fuck are you doing here?" I shouted. "In fact, what are you doing, period? Why am I in the trunk of a car?" This might have been a bit unfair to Clarence, who was lying on his back, curled up like a dying insect, moaning with pain and nausea. I heard the driver's side door slam. A moment later, Garcia Windhover, a.k.a. G-Man, a.k.a. World's Most Useless Human, came trotting around the side, dressed in his usual gangster drag, like he'd put together his Young Jeezy outfit during a sale at Hot Topic. He'd added to it this time, with a black eye patch, which made him look less like a pirate or Nick Fury than like a fourth grader being treated for lazy eye. "Whoa," he said, looking worriedly at Clarence, who was lying in the road next to the car, quietly retching and panting like a woman in painful labor. "Bobby, dude, why'd you do that?" "Why'd I do that? No, why am I in the trunk of a car?" I looked at the gaudiness and unnecessary chrome and winced. "Even worse, your car. I don't want even my dead body in this car, ever. And what's Clarence doing here, Windover? He wasn't supposed to know about this." "I need some help." "You're going to. That's a promise. I didn't mean to sock Clarence in the balls. I was just defending myself against kidnappers. But you..." I glared at the G-Man so direfully that he actually took a couple of steps back. "I'm going to punch you in the man-fruit over and over again until you're ringing like the bells of Notre Dame when the hunchback bought caffeinated by mistake." I actually felt better after I said all that, more like my old self. I sat for a moment on the edge of the open trunk, then bent to help Clarence off the ground. He didn't want to get up at first, but after a moment let himself be coaxed into, if not standing, at least being partially upright. Oh, he moaned, still holding his crotch. "Bodies suck. I think one of them popped." We were on a side street, just off the Camino Real, and a few pedestrians were checking us out, probably wondering whether someone was peddling stolen goods out of the back of their car, which Clarence and G-Man were, in a sense, since I had stolen myself right out of Nyloc's clammy hands. Thanks to Smiler, of course. It felt very weird to think that, I'm sure you can imagine. "Sorry, Junior," I said. "Honest, I didn't know it was you. All I knew was someone had wrapped me up in a tarp. I figured some bad guys were going to dump me in the Baylands or something." Clarence winced and shook his head. "We were taking you back to Garcia's house." "You mean Garcia's sort of grandfather-in-law's house? The place I already was, where he was supposed to keep my body safe and sound and not put it in the trunk of his god-awful embarrassment of a car and drive it around San Judas like I was a bunch of Mexican dress shirts heading to a flea market?" "You sound pissed, dude," G-Man said. Always quick on the uptake, that lad. "Just a little, and I'll probably get over it. But right now I'd like to be somewhere other than by the side of the road. So why don't we go back to Posey's granddad's house, Windover, and you can explain to me what exactly is going on." G-Man nodded. "Okay, they probably took the tent down by now." It turned out that Edward Walker's nice house in the Palo Alto district, where G-Man and Posey had been squatting for the last few months, was going on the market. As part of that process, the real estate agent had informed Posey that the place would have to be tented for termite fumigation. I suppose I should have been grateful that the G-Man had the brains at least to figure out that a massive dose of pesticide might be bad for my body, but he handled it in typical idiotic fashion. I was too heavy for him to carry, he said, so he'd recruited Clarence, who, you may remember, I had intentionally not told about any of this. Whoops. Who True, you may remember I had intentionally not told about any of this to wrap me up in the tarp, carry me out, and drive me in G-Man's car over to the place in Britton Heights where Clarence rented a room. I'd spent the last few days in a tool shed that Clarence's landlords never used. The littlest angel at least had the wit to look embarrassed about that. A tool shed? Really? What, just propped up with the spiders and earwigs and whatever crawling all over me? I knew I was being unpleasant about it, but I wasn't ready to care yet. Maybe having just spent a massive amount of time undergoing torture in hell had something to do with that. No, said Clarence. No, Bobby, I put you on an old pool table. I kind of made a space and then stacked some other stuff on you. You weren't just propped up or anything. And I didn't see any spiders. Thanks for that. It's nice to know I was so well cared for. Clarence frowned. You don't have to be so bitchy, Bobby. You already punched me in the testicles. True. I nodded, down the rest of the bottle of piss water that Garcia kept in the late Edward Walker's refrigerator, some weak-ass hipster beer that used to be drunk by blue-collar guys because it was the only weak-ass crap they could afford, and was now supported almost entirely by nostalgics with tattoos and semi-expensive bicycles. Still, that stuff was better than no beer, although the contest was closer than you might think. Sorry about that again, Clarence. Really, truly. Self-defense, disoriented and confused, probably even PTSD. Put that together and make an excuse out of it you can live with, okay? He gave me one of his looks, somewhere between hurt puppy and irritated older brother. I might not have wanted to trust him, although I was going to have to now, at least to an extent, but how could I dislike anyone who was so easy to annoy and so profitable to tease? So, what were you doing, Bobby? He asked. Crazy shit. Don't try it at home, I said. Seriously, don't try it anywhere else either. Let me go find some real food instead of this box of Triscuits, and I'll tell you what I can. You want to ride in my whip? G-Man asked. You were not included in the invitation. Because it was going to be hard enough talking to Clarence, who at least knew I was an angel, being one himself. There was no way I was going to include Garcia Windhover in the discussion. G-Man's expression, though, was so much that of the kid who not only doesn't get picked, but also the team that gets stuck with him then demands compensation, that I felt sorry for him. Okay, you're right, Garcia. I at least owe you dinner. I mean, you may have carried me around in your trunk like a deer you ran over on the road and were trying to sneak home to make venison jerky, but I did survive. I would come up with some sanitized, non-terrifying to ordinary humans version of what had been going on, although I'd need at least another couple of drinks in me before I could imagine what that version might be. After the explanation, obligations were disposed of, I'd get back to my real job, getting Kaz out of Eligor's clutches. I hadn't forgotten that for a second, especially because I was now wearing my jacket again, the one with the secret angel feather pocket, which happened to be in another space-time continuum. Eligor had actually told the truth about not being able to find it, because if he had, there was no way he'd have let me escape hell. And then, afterward, you, Clarence, my man, can drive me back to my charming apartment, assuming my landlord hasn't already rented it to some wife-beating crackhead, and I'll catch you up on company business on the way. I'm down with that, said G-Man. You want to hit the Chinese place down in Whiskey Gulch? Sure. But one thing, Windhover, if you're going to hang around with me, you may not wear that eye patch. Not in public. It reminded me too much of the Broken Boy's helper, Little Tico. That kid hadn't been covering up to look cool. He'd been hiding something ugly and painful. But it's a tribute to Slick Rick. And Rick would agree with me. For one thing, Slick is actually missing an eye. You aren't. The G-Man pouted, but agreed to leave his newest accessory behind. I almost told him that even without it, he would have looked right at home in Pandemonium, capital of hell, but he probably would have thought that was a compliment. And that is where we are going to stop for the night. So, with that, I thank you all. Isaac Tim says, "Sweet Lord Tad, you set the violence to 11. I always try to set the violence to 11. I don't always make it, but I always get to at least a 9.5 or so. Anyway, so with that, I am going to thank you all, as I always do, and mean very most sincere like, to thank you for joining me. It was a pleasure, as always, to spend time with you. I will be back at 7 p.m. tonight, since here in California it is now Sunday. I will be back with you tonight at 7 p.m., or whoever happens to be here, or you may be seeing this on YouTube. But until then, I ask you with all, what's the word I'm looking for? I ask you with all, not sincerity again, we already said that, but I ask you with all due something or other to take good care of yourselves. Take very good care of yourselves. I need you. I need you all to stay well. Take good care of your loved ones, family, and friends. Keep an eye out for anybody who might need a little helping hand here or there, because we all need to pitch in together and to make it through this thing called life, brothers and sisters. And I will see you very soon. So peace, be well, and ciao, bambini.